Composition of a Killer fans. Dr. Cassidy here. Thanks for tuning in today. We're going to be talking more about juvenile offenders who have been classified as serial killers. Now, again, let me just remind you that what we talk about in this podcast is not meant to be clinical diagnosis. And this particular podcast, there are some things that we will discuss that are somewhat more graphic than usual. I mean, there's some we've talked about some pretty sick things that people have done. This one is really disturbing, in my opinion, because the offenders are young children themselves, and their victims are also children. So just a little warning about that. So let's talk first about Alyssa Bustemante. You may have heard of her. She has a Netflix movie. She's very well known by those who keep up with serial killers or juvenile offenders. And she's actually not the true definition of a serial killer. She only has one death attributed to her, but they do believe that she probably killed others. There's no proof of that, but that's why she's on this list. She's considered a serial killer. And she certainly has the makings of someone who, if they hadn't been taken off the street, would have been a serial killer, because she really enjoyed what she did. Now, she's 15 years old today, but when this occurred, she was 11. She actually killed her 9-year-old neighbor named Elizabeth Olton, the day before her 11th birthday. She had a very troubled childhood, and she had mental issues that were ignored. And I find that incredibly important to point out, because, as you know, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know that one of my biggest issues with anybody, no matter what their age, is, could this have been prevented had we looked for these signs, had we helped them with mental health issues, or were they ignored? And in this case, she was ignored. And that's the problem. That's just the problem. You know, we think, oh, it would never happen. This is not going to happen. This is a young kid. They would never do something like that. Well, they do. They do. That's why we have a list, or multiple lists, of different juveniles who have committed these heinous acts. So the only motive that they found from her interviews, as well as, you know, the way it turned out, was to experience the feeling of killing someone. When they arrested her, she was charged with first-degree murder, and the court later sentenced her to life imprisonment, which is pretty common. And she looks like a typical girl. I mean, she doesn't. I know that there's no physical characteristics of serial killers. It can literally be anybody. But when you're talking about juveniles, she just looks like a typical girl next door. But she was a cutter. So very young, she started cutting herself. When she was arrested, she actually had over 300 cuts on her body. And if you know anything about cutting, it is very popular among preteens and teenagers. It's a way for them to feel something. They report that they do it because it gives them a sense of actual, you know, being able to feel their emotions. They don't have that ability, and they feel empty. They feel like, you know, nothing really impresses them or has any effect on them except cutting. And if you know anything about cutting, and this goes also into like BDSM and that kind of stuff, sometimes when people experience pain, it releases endorphins in the brain and they enjoy that. Anybody watch 50 Shades of Grey? Um, that pain is considered a pleasure. Now, cutting yourself is not necessarily considered a pleasure. It's not a sexual pleasure, but it does release this feel good, um, hormone that helps, just helps them cope. It's very deep. I am certainly not a psychologist. I just know enough about it to be dangerous, really. But um, certainly we see a lot of cutting. I've seen a lot of cutting. I had friends in school that were cutters, and I don't personally understand it, but that's okay. I feel like if they figured out something that's helping them cope, then I guess if that works for them, that's fine. Now, Alyssa is a small girl. She's 5 feet tall, and I'm 5'1", so she's shorter than me. I don't know if you. That's pretty short. Um, and right now she's 28 years old now, but during the course of her trial, she was 15. So she was born in 1994, and her grandparents raised her. Both her parents were in their teens when she was born. That was Michelle Bustamante, who was the wife of Caesar Bustamante. Several police complaints were registered in her mother's name for theft and drug possession while her father was in prison at her birth. In her childhood, Alyssa used to write poems, and she also attended the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints regularly. Now, right off the bat, her being, I don't have extreme details about this. I just know she was raised by her grandparents. At some point, I'm sure she was subjected to life with her parents. Both of them were definitely, people with issues and with criminal records. And we don't know to what degree she was abused. But certainly bad enough to the point where she was a cutter and she had attempted suicide many times. But being raised by her grandparents, that in and of itself is considered trauma because she's removed from her birth home. And maybe she wasn't actually in the home with her mother and father and then removed from that. Maybe she was always with the grandparents. But the fact that she wasn't with her parents, she did not form that attachment with her mother. And we know that lack of attachment to the mother is a major contributor to many of our serial killers. In 2007, she tried to attempt suicide and was sent to the psychiatric hospital in St. Martin's. That's where she was from, St. Martin's, where she was put on antidepressants. But she tried cutting her wrists several times. In her social media profiles, she listed her hobbies as cutting and killing people. And then there's a story that was supposed to be on her social media page. I couldn't find it. I hope it's been taken down, and that's probably why I couldn't find it. But she was seen touching an electric fence in a video. And then she told her brother, she had 2 younger brothers, she told her brother to touch it. And he did, and it hurt him. And she actually wrote, this is where it gets good. This is where my brother gets hurt. She was able, if this tells you anything, she was able to hold that electric fence and never made a grimace, never made a sound. She held that electric fence to convince her brother it wouldn't hurt, and then told him to do it, and it shocked him. Now, I grew up on a farm. I mean, there was an electric fence 20 feet behind my house. I've touched electric fences before, and I remember, my brother messing with me, telling me the fence wasn't on, and I would touch the fence or try to cross the fence and get shocked by it. It's common. I mean, we do that. Kids do that kind of thing. Not to this extreme, though. I mean, I've never seen anybody, even like my grandfather, who was so used to, fencing and, some people grow, some sort of resistance to that, but I've never seen anybody be able to just grab an electric fence and hold on to it with no sign of pain or discomfort. She did that. And then her brother, of course, grabbed the fence and he was shocked and she thought it was hilarious. I think the big picture here is she was enjoying the pain of someone else, um, and her brother, being her brother, which is to me somewhat more morbid, and the fact that she was able to hold on to that with no physical reaction. That may be that numbing that they talk about, people who are cutters talk about. And they do sometimes do these things so that they feel alive. So her victim was Elizabeth Olton, who was her 9-year-old neighbor, and she used to come to Bustemante's house to play with her and her brothers. So this was a friend, if you will, a neighborhood friend. In October of 2009, Alyssa forced her sister to bring Elizabeth to a forest that was nearby. Then Alyssa went to that spot and strangled Elizabeth and slit her throat and then stabbed her several times just for the thrill. After the killing, she wrote, this is a little graphic. I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them, and now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Kay, I gotta go to church now. LOL. I, I'm floored by this, testimony, if you will, that you would post that. As soon as you finish killing someone, you take a moment to post this on the internet and then go to church. Um, there's no sense. There's absolutely no sense to it. Um, when Elizabeth's mother reported to the police that her daughter did not return home, um, we know that Alyssa attended the church. There was a church dance, and she was at this dance while the police tried to find Olton. On the next day, FBI agents questioned Alyssa, and they also took possession of her diary. Officials found a hole behind her house, to which she replied that she liked digging holes. The FBI found another hole that was covered with leaves. When the officials dug into the hole, they found Elizabeth's body, and Alyssa was charged with first-degree murder and arrested at that time. After confessing to the murder, she first attended the trial on November 17th. She was given the charges of first-degree murder and being armed while murdering. She was later given life imprisonment with a conditional release and a sentence of 30 years. She has consistently, as most are, been visited by psychologists, psychiatrists who want to study her mental condition, try to understand her mental condition. And most all of them have concluded that she has a borderline personality disorder and clinical depression. We know that the majority of serial killers have some sort of personality disorder, some sort of social disorder, avoidance disorder, and of course, she's been diagnosed with that multiple times over. So I feel like that's fairly accurate. She was going to be tried as a child. That's what she thought too. I mean, she thought that she was, young and she would be probably get off pretty easy because she was young. But they actually chose to try her as an adult, and she was incredibly upset by that. It just really ripped her apart.